Hey everybody, this is Ryan Scully, and I'd like to thank you for joining me today for this tutorial. What we're going to be taking a look at is a track that I recently composed and contributed as a demo to Soundiron's huge Olympus Symphonic choral collection, which is comprised of both their Mars and Venus Next Generation choir libraries. We're going to take a look at the track from the ground up, as well as the various patches that I used to construct the piece. Those patches are the fast and slow Slavonic polysustains, the true legato vowel patches, as well as the huge Marcato phrase builder patches. We're going to take a look in detail at the plethora of automation data that I've programmed into the patches as well as into my sequencer, which you see here is Logic Pro. And just a note on that, anything that I'm going to show you throughout this tutorial as far as the sequencer data in Logic could be easily translated to whichever sequencer you host on your own platform. So what I really hope to achieve here today is to show you some various tips and tricks that you could potentially take away and include into some of your own choral arrangements. And I'd also like to just discuss some general pointers about writing for choirs in general. And I'd like to touch on some really good reference material that you can listen to yourself to really kind of broaden your perception as to what is possible for choir writing and what could be of a great benefit to you when working with these extremely powerful libraries. So I'm going to go ahead and play the track for you. It's called the Iron Odyssey. I hope you enjoy it. I will see you at the end and we will get started. Thank you so much. Okay, so that is the track in its entirety. As you can hear, it is composed of a full symphonic string arrangement. It has some light percussion, really just some dynamic cymbal rolls, some deep sub hits and some bass drum rolls, really just for transitional effect. And then at the forefront, we have the Venus in purple and Mars in red, respectively, the choirs, which are really the forefront of the track. So I've read through a lot of comments and from potential users, people that are interested in the library, maybe have recently purchased or are kind of on the fence. And one of the common themes is for people that are not familiar with the type of patches and content that are offered. You see some comments about, how do I go ahead and get started with libraries like Venus and Mars? Where's a good place to start? Where are you going to find, that instant inspiration where you can just come right out, build a track, and just go right with it? So I'd like to kind of answer that question from my own perspective, and at the same time give you a look into what I highly recommend doing with all sample libraries, and especially these two, because of the dearth of information that's included. So what I did, and this is going to actually segue right into the beginning of the track here. Let me just pull over here. This is Vienna Ensemble Pro 5 for anybody that's not familiar with this interface, and this is where I host all of my sample content. And I have a full Venus instance here. Now, for me, nothing speaks to realism, and they truly are the heart of the library, in my opinion, like the polysustain patches. They are just absolutely beautiful performances from both Venus and Mars. For anybody that has ever been a part of a professional, or collegiate choir, the thing that really separates the best from the best is the performance value and really, really tight and proper diction. And you absolutely have that to great effect in both of these libraries. You have two excellently constructed performances from both the men and women's choir. You have an excellent conductor, and it's recorded in a really pristine space that that captures the library in exquisite detail. So when you talk about things like diction, that's when you really want to have that definition and that unison between the members of the choir. Your crux and your ma and your vo, those kinds of things. You never want to sacrifice, losing that definition. So you always want to keep that in the back of your mind when you're starting to put your arrangements together. Think about diction. Those are the kinds of things that are really going to stand out, and it provides a really solid entrance for your choir performances. The polysustains are an excellent source that represent that exact type of diction that I'm talking about, and they blend really seamlessly with the other portions of the choir, especially the true legato vowels. So we're gonna see plenty of that in this track, but what I did, getting back to when I first got this library, is you want to go through and familiarize yourself with the performances. We're looking at here is the Venus Polysustain Fast Slavonic Tempo Sync Contact 5 patch. And I'll explain to you exactly what all of this means when we look at my first MIDI region over in the arrange window here, but I can tell you it is fantastic what this can do. What you see here is I have the stage mics along with the hall mics, and I just did this is as personal preference, and I have a mix set up here because I wanted to capture that ambience as well as the upfront definition of the patches, and this is totally up to taste. Both mic positions sound absolutely fantastic on their own, as well as blended together as you see here. So what I did was, when going through this library for the first time, I played through, familiarized myself with the performances, felt how they came under my fingers when playing on my keyboard here, how the performances come through, what the timing, what the rhythm is like. And then I start looking at my envelopes and other CC manipulable data here. And as far as workflow goes, you set yourself a little project. Come through and assign CC data, to knobs or sliders or whatever else that you use on your MIDI controller. Like for instance, for each of the patches I go through, I assign my swell knob to CC1. I assign my X blend to CC11. I have the release knob, which is assigned to 112. There's no particular rhyme or reason to the order. It's just kind of what works in my particular workflow on my controller. I have CC assigned to the legato on and off button, and I will show you why I've done this a little bit later on in the patch, in the track, sorry. And I did this through each of the patches, each of the polysustains. So by the time I was finished, I had a really good idea of what they sounded like in both the Slavonic and the Latin texts, and I immediately was inspired and I knew what I wanted to do for the beginning of this track and how I wanted to achieve it. So when I was all said and done, I said, okay, let's get started. So I came over, and here are my first MIDI regions, and we're going to take a listen first to the Venus Polysustain Fast Slavonic Tempo Syncable Contact 5 patch, which you see right here. So let's take a listen to the patch on its own soloed, and I will explain to you everything that's going on here between the CC automation as well as the key switching in the patch. So what you're hearing here is two layers on this first phrase. You're hearing the mari hie, which is assigned to the first layer, in dievo, which is the second layer. So what I've done here is the key switch that you see on the bottom assigns the first layer to mari hie, and the top layer is assigned to this key switch, which puts it to dievo. So what I've done to automate this is when the phrase starts, it begins at mari hie. However, as it reaches the second half of the phrase, I quickly use a crossfade using my CC11, which I have mapped to the X blend, and it quickly switches very quickly through crossfading to the dievo, and it actually makes it as one cohesive patch. So let's hear that and see how the CC data corresponds. Sorry, I'll play that for you one more time. I forgot to solo the patch. So there you have it, where normally if I did not use the X blend to change halfway between the patch, you would have just had mari hie, and it would have held out on the final syllable of the first layer, which would have just ended on that release. Whereas now you've created an entirely different phrase, and you're using it all with the legato feature on, which I just absolutely love the way it comes out, especially when you start blending it with the other elements of the choir, as well as, in this case, the string orchestra. So when you play with these patches, I normally play them in on my keyboard immediately. However, you really want to get under the hood with your MIDI data here, and as you're going to see through this piece, I did not work to a click track at all at any point, and there is tons and tons of tempo automation going on, and my starts my start and stop points and my offsets on the MIDI data is all varied because you want to capture that realistic performance from the choirs. As you can see here, the second piece of the legato transition from the first layer, is not to the grid. And I really went in deep and push and pulled my data until it worked smoothly and it sounded realistic. And you really want to do this, well, at least I highly recommend it when working with the polysustain patches. So that is taking a look at CC11, in which obviously once we finished the first phrase here, I put my X blend back to its original starting position and used my additional key switch, which changed the first layer from Marie to Stubayu, which you hear here in the second part of this phrase, which also is going through the legato transitions. So the first bit of data that you saw here too, this is my swell knob. So as I was saying before, with how you really want to emphasize the diction and bring out that really glistening performance, you see my CC1 controller is really reaching its pinnacle on those parts. The yeah, vol, you want to capture that as you're going through this. You want this to come out in your performance because, that's what a real performer in the choir is going to look to do. So this is my MIDI CC1 automation data here. Now, one final piece of automation that I'd like to show you in this patch, and it may not be entirely necessary to do this, but I wanted to really pull out all the stops as far as having smooth transitions between the notes and also having them finish properly on the releases. So I have set the crossfade knob, which is available on each of those patches, to about 75, which is pretty generous, and that helps between your legato transitions to make them really smooth, especially in these polysustain patches. And one other thing that I've automated, I'm going to show you here, is I have my CC112 assigned to the release control of the envelope. So actually what I've done is, while going through the actual legato transitions, I've pulled my release knob down pretty drastically, so I'm not getting any extended release on the samples. And when I'm on the final portion of my phrase where I want to really emphasize the release, I'm pulling the release knob back up, so I'm capturing that full portion. See if you can hear that here. So with my release knob back up, I'm catching that last piece of the performance right there. So that's another little thing that I'm doing automation-wise on the polysustain patch here. So this is all we need to really look at this first portion here. Like I said, we have a very nice, smooth D major, very melodic, pretty phrase going on in the soprano voices of the choir. So taking a look back, let's go back to our arrange window here. The second half of the phrase, there's nothing really overly special or as complicated going on between the layer blending on this. I've actually just gone ahead and used the one layer patches here. However, with additional modulation CCs and like I said, the release automation that you saw on the first patch. So we'll listen. So the first layer that you're hearing is na chic. And what I've done is, using the legato transition, you've really extended the capabilities melodically of that patch. And as we can hear, with diction, as we're talking about, you get that really nice ending consonant here. It's just the I'm sorry, that may sound, you know, those realistic performances right there. Like I said, that's really what you want to pull out of these performances, really sell it. And that's why I just, as I've said, absolutely love the polysustain patches. So that's really our intro theme here. We don't necessarily come back to this again. It's not an entirely long piece, but we do have somewhat of a recapitulation on this theme towards the bombastic ending that we hear at the end. So let's come back to our arrange window right here. I'd like to actually just play those two patches again solo in unison, and we're going to take a look at the actual user interface itself, so you can visually see all that's going on with the automation data. So let me just go ahead and pull my patch back over here and just take a look at everything that's going on. And just I really want to hammer home how much you really want to rely on your automation. And what I've just shown you there is really only scratching the surface to even more of what's included here. We didn't even touch upon what you can achieve with the polyphony as well as the range. Which is a whole other extended feature to these patches. But let's take a look at what we just heard and visually see here. Okay, so as you can see, there's when you actually put a picture to it, there's quite a lot going on as far as the automation right there. So just really emphasizing how much you do want to get under the hood when getting behind these patches. So the last piece that I just want to show you on the intro here is quickly just what I'm doing on the true legato patch that you hear going on in tandem with the fast Slavonic polysustain patch. And also one other I'm sorry, really quick note about the tempo syncable contact 5 portion. When I started this, one of the fantastic things that's offered in Contact 5 is their new Time Machine Pro engine, which you see taken full advantage in the tempo syncable patches in the Venus library. And what I actually did was I moved around my host starting tempo, and I found a tempo that worked really well, or just felt really right for the type of phrase that I wanted to execute. So I dragged it to 125.5 that you see right here, and this patch is going to tempo sync in unison with your host. So again, you can find something that prior to advancements in libraries like this with the choir, if you had a pre-recorded performance and it was recorded at a much slower tempo or much faster, vice versa, sometimes you would lose that usability in a certain track you were working on if it was not compliant with the tempo that you had set. Now, with what we have with Time Machine Pro available in Contact 5, you get so much more usability out of things like this, and it really just is fantastic and just completely broadens the horizon for what you can do here. So just getting back to the true legato patch that we have here for the vowels, I really just want to show you one thing in particular that I'm doing here as far as the automation goes. And what this is also the speed control contact 5 patch, which you see right here. And the specific automation that I'm going to be using here is exactly that, on the speed control. So let's take a look. I'm going to play these two patches in unison, parts, I should say, in unison. And let's just take a look at what the speed control is doing. And that's my automation data right here. Here are my true legato MIDI. This is my MIDI region for that. And listen to it in tandem with the polysustain patch that we just went through. Sorry, had a little bit of a drop note in there. But what happens here is, looking at the speed control, I'm actually pulling it up and pushing it down to emphasize certain pieces of the performance. Obviously, with the speed control way down, you're going to get a very much of a portamento type of performance, which is a great effect when you want to pull that out. And when you have the speed control pushed all the way up, you're going to have a much quicker and, to many's perception, a much more realistic legato transition. So for me, I wanted to vary that a bit in the performance that you just heard there, so that you're getting that life out of the choir. They're not going to be able to keep that same perfect speed throughout the entire portion of that performance. And at the end here, I really wanted to pull out that kind of portamento sound, which to me, I hear it's, very much, Edward Scissorhand-ish, which, I personally love that choir performance and that score. So to a nice effect, I think that it really kind of connects that line nicely. And I actually just wanted to apologize for what I said before. The polysustain patches are actually assigned to the altos in this portion of the piece, and this is more of your sopranos up in here, which you could see are major and minor sixes. So major and minor sixes and major and minor thirds are very vocal friendly, and especially do a nice job when you're putting together some legato patches, which work nicely in tandem with your polysustains, and also even under some of your Marcato phrases, which we'll see a little bit later on. So now we're going to build up quite a big crescendo into the next portion of the piece, which you're going to see a full arrangement of the choirs, both Mars and Venus in performance together, along with a full arrangement of the symphonic strings and some of the light percussion as well. You're really going to hear how these two libraries blend together, and it's really just an unbelievable tone. With, in this case, the polysustains and the true legato phrases. So we're going to take a deep look into what's going on in the patches automation-wise, as well as in the sequencer in this section. And I'm also going to talk just a little bit about the arrangements themselves in the choir, and really starting to get to that point where you build a level of comfort between the sections of the choir, between your sopranos, your altos, your tenors, your baritones, your bass ones, your bass twos. They all have such a huge part to play in the overall performance, and in your composition in general. And when you find that comfort and be able to look at the choir as a complete device that way, you'll really start to find some fantastic things you could put together with these two libraries. So I'm going to go ahead and play you the next section in the full arrangement, and then we'll take a deeper look behind the choir patches. So here we go. So we have our first big crescendo here of both Venus and Mars polysustains working in unison. Nothing too crazy going on. Basically, we're looking here at Mars, excuse me, and we have just the third and the fifth of the chord, and then followed by the big B minor chord here with the fifth and the bass. And as you can see with the key switches here, we're just changing between the first one layer phrases of Ro di la and Yesi douche, which builds up to a big almost fortissimo crescendo here, which is going to segue into our next section. So we'll just listen to those two regions together here solo. Okay, so that brings us into our next section with the full arrangement here. I'm not going to spend too much time really going into the orchestration and the theory end of what's happening in the piece per se. I really want to just kind of emphasize what is happening with the inner workings of the choir with your different parts, albeit sopranos, altos, tenors, or basses. And I also want to pay careful attention, which I'm going to show you in just a moment, as to what's happening up here in my sequencer with tons of different tempo automation happening, as well as what you're going to see with some volume automation, which is absolutely essential to use in your sequencer with constructing pieces like this, with libraries like this. So let's move on up, and we're going to take a look at what's happening in the tempo automation here. So as I had mentioned earlier, I didn't work to a click track really at all throughout this entire piece. I mean, there are sections where I did work within the grid, and you'll see that especially in the next section that we're going to move into with the short notes and the short articulations. But human beings, in real life, we're not quantized. So when we construct a piece like this, or really any kind of a symphonic mock-up, or where you want to simulate a live performance, think like what a conductor would be like. Think about what the performers are. We don't stick to a straight click track. You have to allow space for your performance to breathe. So as what you're seeing here, in Logic, what I've done with the tempo is that, between phrases, I've got some pretty big dips in the tempo, which normally is, as we saw, set at about 125.5. So I want you just to take a look at exactly how that works right here, and pay close attention to this and listen to the phrases of the choir in tandem with the strings, and see how it really does allow it to breathe quite a bit more with this automation going on. Okay, so let's just take a listen to the choir section on its own for this particular part here. Pay close attention to how the chords are working together and the legato vowels are moving throughout the polysustains here that we have both in the sopranos and altos, and then also we hear quite a bit in the really low bass, bass 1, bass 2 is really carrying the low portion of the chords here. So let's take a listen just on its own. So just a little disclaimer too, as with any big multi-track recording, sometimes when you hear particular tracks exposed, it could sound a little unorthodox or out of place, but really what you want to look at is the big picture as to how it all works together with the full arrangement. But also, I hope you saw as we went through these phrases here and these particular devices, how it interacted with the tempo automation that we were just looking at in Logic up here. So up here I have the Venus True Legato A-O patch, which is going to lead us directly into the full choir tutti, which comes in on this main section we're looking at. So let's just take a look at this patch solo on its own, and I want to point out to you how using the true legato patches in tandem with your polysustain patches can really serve as a nice cohesive glue to tie in your melodic content in tandem with the harmonies. So let's just take a quick look at what's happening on this patch. Okay, so there is a crossfade between the vowels here, and I'm just going to show you as I pull up my expression. What we were just looking at was the CC1 for the dynamic crossfade, but as you can see here, it goes between the O to the A on this particular legato transition, which melts in pretty nicely with the tuo phrase that's going to come through on the polysustains. So you can just hear how this happens here. Okay, so now let's listen to the arrangement and hear how the legato transition between the A-O patch ties in to the full choral arrangement. Oops, a little short. Now let's take a look at the true legato U patch that's happening in Mars in our low basses down here. So let's solo out this brief little phrase. Okay, let's go back and listen to it with our complete arrangement. So now, keeping in mind what we just saw in the A-O patch from Venus, and now the true legato U, listen how these melodic vowel phrases are intertwining with the chords that we're establishing in the polysustains in both Venus and Mars, which we'll take a look at in just a moment. So let's first take a look at the Venus polysustain figure that I have set up here. And let's go over and take a look at the MIDI data. And important things I want to point out to you here that I'm doing with the automation. And we had touched upon this earlier at the beginning of the tutorial about how when I was first assigning my CC automation with my controller in correspondence with the patches, you're going to hear in this figure how the legato on, legato off button I have automated is a real time saver, and it's very useful from what you're going to see in this particular phrase. So let's hear it soloed out. So we're just going through the one layer at this point. I have my key switch set up so that you're hearing tuo go over the first phrase, and then on the key switch, which brings it to go spot, I have the legato on feature coming on, which is going to then make this a legato transition, which works really nicely in the context of the melodic development within the chords for this section. So let's take a look, and you can see how that automation kicks on right here. So keep an eye on the legato on-off button. So now we'll see the same technique being used in the Mars figure here. And here we have the polysustain patch with the legato feature off on these first initial phrases, and then the legato on button is going to trigger so that these then become legato transitions. And then we again have a nice little bass line set up for some melodic development, which closes out this particular section of the piece. So let's take a listen, and we'll hear how this triggers in. Now let's hear how the legato feature turns on, and this now, as we said, becomes a transition. So there's one final tip that I'd like to cover with you before moving on from this section, and this goes back to using your sequencer's automation in tandem with the automation in the patches themselves. One of the most important things that I like to utilize when working with these libraries is my volume automation from within my sequencer, for which you see here I have the Venus polysustain soloed with the Mars polysustain soloed. And what you see here is my auxiliary track for Venus, and this is my volume automation. And then here is my volume automation for the Mars polysustain. And on almost every polysustain in this piece, when I'm initially coming in, I have an ever so slightly short fade in to the beginning of most of the phrases. And this, when it comes to mixing the libraries together, has a really nice way of kind of melting them into one place, because they are, powerful in what they could do, but they're also quite powerful in their output from when you're going to play them. So the fading in of the patches I find to be of utmost importance when it comes to blending these libraries together and making them into one cohesive space, so to speak. So let's just take a listen to them soloed while paying close attention to what the volume automation is doing in the sequencer. Alright, so we're not going to take too deep of a look into what's happening on this last ah-oo patch in Venus, or the final polysustain, so to speak, that's coming out of Venus as well. But as we play through this section for one last time, you can hear how they're kind of melding in with what's going on in the other arrangements. So now that we've had a chance to really kind of dissect this section, let's listen to the full arrangement again in context with the symphonic strings and the light percussion, and see how Venus and Mars really just kind of melt very nicely into the environment that we've created here. Okay, so we've made our way into the next, what I like to call the angry little section of the piece in B minor. And I'm not going to touch really at all on what's happening in the strings. There's just a number of short articulations between spiccato and staccato, and they're really kind of working as a type of call and response to what you're going to hear in the choirs. So what I really want to emphasize is what really is capable in the Venus and Mars Marcato Staccato Phrase Builder patches, which are really fantastic and present you with many different options to put together some pretty elaborate sequences, which I've have done in this piece. So we're going to go ahead and listen, and then we'll take a look and get started. Okay. This is in full context. So here we have our Mars Marcato Phrase Builder patch. As you can see here, here's my CC1 data that I'm really just using for my volume control for this particular patch. So here are my notes, which as you can see are curtailed to be pretty short, and they kind of relay between these being the staccatos and these here being the marcatos. And down here are my key switches to set up the next sequence that I'll show you on the patch itself. So let's just play this in solo mode, and you can see exactly what's happening.
Vo, men, sa, ris, vo, tu, vo, men, vo, men, sa, tu, vo,
Okay, so as you can see, my dynamic range is going up pretty extensively as I'm raising up through this section to capture the marcatos, which are going to lead us into the next part. So let's go ahead and bring over the patch itself. Okay, here is your Mars Marcato Phrase Builder, and what I've done, it's very easy and intuitive to work with. See, these numbers that you have listed up here are where you can choose a new sequence, and here are all of your available syllables, both consonants and vowels, that you can include. For this particular portion of the piece, I have up to 7 different sequences chosen, and it's very easy to go through each one. As you see, I'm hitting the previous and next button to cycle through, and here's where you can build your sequences. These buttons here allow you to choose whether you want that particular syllable to be a marcato or a staccato, and each sequence can be chosen via key switch, which you had seen while taking a look at my MIDI region over there. So let's go ahead and play that portion again and just take a look as to what's happening. And you can see where I've also have the marcatos and the staccatos switching between each other.
vo, men, sa, ris,
Marcatos, back to staccato.
men, vo, men, sa, tu, vo,
There's just one last piece of automation that I want to show you that I've programmed into this particular region here. On the Mars Marcato Phrase Builder patch, I have automated the offset knob, which is a very helpful, which you can also have full use of in the polysustains as well. The offset knob I have assigned to CC11, and really what this does is it actually moves ahead into the sample. So your sample start time can be curtailed or expanded depending on whatever it is that you're going to need it to do. So in order to keep my staccatos really tight on this particular piece, I've actually raised my offset just to about 9 as far as how much I wanted to go into the samples. And then very importantly, for my Marcato phrases, I've pulled the offset back down to 0 so that I'm capturing the full performance, from the beginning of the samples. So you can just hear this really quick.
Vo, men, sa, ris,
So here is my Venus Marcato staccato phrase sequences. And what you see down here is I have automation on the attack dial through CC11. Just so I didn't want any as drastic as what you can get through the offset knob from actually cutting into the samples. I just wanted to manipulate the envelope via the attack. So one other thing just worth noting here, and like we had said earlier about staying away from over quantization. Some things are falling onto the grid, some are behind the grid, and some are actually what I'm pointing at here is ahead of the grid, and most are actually a little bit behind, so that you're staying into the pocket of the performance. And as you see here, I've got my key switches to cycle between the available sequences. So let's just take a quick listen here as to what's going on. And as my velocity is increasing, so is the dynamic range. So let's hear. Okay, so we're going to take a look back to the full choral arrangement for this section. And without looking too deep into the MIDI regions themselves, I'm just going to point out for you quick what's happening in these little parts right here, just to kind of touch back on what we were saying earlier about understanding the different workings of your choir and assigning your parts to their respective performance, be it sopranos, altos, tenors, or basses. So we have our deep basses on the Marcatos. We have mainly our altos working on the Venus Marcatos, and then we're going to have the sopranos come in up on top for this, really eerie little melody that's going to fade in, and it goes between the oo crossfade to the ah. And we're going to have our tenors come in on this part here on the oo patch for the value, the vowel patch, and it's going to come through, and it melts in pretty nicely with the polysustains in both Venus and Mars here, and these kind of interchange in between, right, the Marcato phrase builders. So let's go ahead and just listen to that. So just keep in mind, like I said, the division of the parts as we go through this.
vo, men, sa, ris,
All right, so you can hear as you're going in there where the different sections of the choir are coming in and really are taking full advantage of the voices. And this is really what is, to me, is so great about Venus and Mars, is because you have these dedicated libraries to both sections of the choir, so you can really get in there in minute detail to bring out those portions of the choir, sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. So hopefully that provided some insight to you right there. One other note too about the Marcato patches, if you notice as you're listening through this, especially with the basses, like we talked about earlier, how you always want to emphasize good diction to make that come through in your performances. For the most part, I have some deep consonants coming through on the downbeats of the men's portion of the choir. So yeah, just take a listen.
vo, men, ris,
So, the consonants really do cut through the performance there, and have a really nice unifying factor. So one other piece just worth noting here, like also we said using your tempo automation to really bring out your live performance. As you could see with a little dip here from the phrase before, have like a steady increase going on. So you're building intensity in your Marcato performances in tandem with your true legato vowels over top of them. So that's pretty much it for this section. We'll take a quick look in here and then we're pretty much almost done. So let's move over to there. So the real backbone to this next section is rooted in the marcatos for the basses, and you get a little bit of the tenor in here up to as you're coming along, tenor baritone really. And this is really one of my favorite parts, just because you can hear just the pure power and real like beauty that you get out of these marcato patches and Mars. Just take a listen, and really what we're seeing here as the backbone for the harmony is you just have triads, major and minor, and also in inversions. So just moving along diatonically, and it just really sets up a nice architecture here. So let's take a listen. And then we have that pretty big crescendo on the last syllable there, which leads into our outro. So getting back to using divisions of your choir, here for this particular section, we have the true legato vowel patches for the ah, oo, and we have on top here the sopranos, which is a line that's going in unison with the violin ones, and then we have the altos on the bottom, for the most part separated by an octave, with some additional intervals in between, and you're seeing some crossfading going on. It starts off on the oo, and then it ends on the ah, which just blends in really nicely with the marcatos that we're hearing from Mars. So let's just hear this piece isolated on its own. So yeah, just really beautiful performances captured there in Venus. And we could take a look. Here's my CC dynamic crossfade modulation that's going on. So really trying to get into the meat of the vowels as they're enunciated. So this is what we have here. So moving along to our tenors, what we have here is a really nice descending line. I'm using the vowel oo patch, which blends in really well with the basses that are singing through their marcatos, and it again lends itself to making a nice cohesive performance. So I'm going to play you from here the track together, so listen how this just kind of moves in, and it adds a really nice melodic development through the section. Again, so just getting back to really you want to conceptualize what you have in your choir, and that you're taking full advantage of that you do have all these distinct parts, between your sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses, and that's, you're assigning their own interweaving parts to make up the complete device on the choir. All right, so not too much to talk about as far as the string section again from this last piece that we just heard, which by the way we had modulated from B minor where we were prior, and which is actually going to set up for our final section, which brings us to C major. But this is really, you're hearing just a support system in the strings. We have some pretty quick measured tremolos going on in the second violins, just to add some additional movement, additional dynamic to what's going on. So that is it for here. Now we're on to our final section. So I'm just going to play it so you can hear it fully in context, and then we'll take a deeper look. And again, a lot of what is going to occur in the choir, we've touched upon a lot of the techniques already earlier in the piece. So we'll just take a look and as kind of an overview. So I'm going to go ahead and play it for you in full. Okay, for our outro or recapitulation of the piece here, I'm actually going to play you the string section solo. And the reason I'm going to do that is because when we take a look into the choir portion, a lot of what's going on here is playing in unison with the sections of the orchestra or are harmonizing. So I kind of want you to hear this on its own before we come in and include the choir, and I think it'll preserve, you know, a nice kind of backdrop to how I arranged the end of the Odyssey, so to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and play this on its own. This is just the string section. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at just the choral aspect on its own. And what I want you to hear is at the beginning here, we've got, you know, really big bombastic polysystanes coming in both Mars and Venus, and they're singing back on the Mari He, which you heard in the beginning of the track with the altos. And you're going to hear a legato transition in Venus on the Mari He, which is going to correspond with your first violin line. And then the other part I wanted to point out to you in the division is for the Mars legato A-O vowel, you're going to have the basses on the O, which is going to correspond in unison with our cello line here. And the altos are going to be singing on the O value as well in Venus, and they're actually singing a major and minor tenths separated from that line, which is really just major minor thirds, just separated by more than an octave. So let's take a quick listen to the beginning here, and then I will unsolo that and play you the full arrangement again, and you can listen to exactly what we were just speaking about there. Okay, so now let's hear it all together. Now we're up to Stu Bayou in the polysustains, which we hear again the legato transition happening in Venus on the tempo sync patch. And then we have Mars also on the bottom end of that. We have the legato transition vowels occurring in both Venus and Mars here. We have the tenors coming in on the oo patch, and we have Venus coming in on the ah at the end here, and it really hits a nice pinnacle up hitting the fifth of the chord here before it moves into our final really forte transaction of this outro, where you're going to be hearing the Venus legato transitions moving in tandem with what you heard in the second violins and the violas, where they've got this tight little intervallic figure going on. So it's going to be playing in unison with the second violins, actually, sorry. And after that, we've pretty much just hit the end, where we're going to have a nice little decrescendo with the entire orchestra. So I'm just going to play you through this to the end. Now, it gets a little busy in here between the two polysustain phrases that are going to be triggered, plus the legato vowels that are going to be happening. So it's like I said earlier, sometimes when you take something out of context of the piece, it could sound a little strange, but the whole focus is on the completed arrangement. So I'm going to go ahead and play this to the end, and then we're pretty much done. So here we go. Okay, so we've reached the end of our tutorial. I hope you guys have enjoyed what we've covered today, and most importantly, I hope that it gave you a good impression as to what you can do with these fantastic libraries. And also just to note, I've really only skimmed the surface of the content. Like I said, we went through this today. We're looking at a majority of the Slavonic texts with the ensembles, on top of the true legato patches and the Marcato Staccato Phrase Builders. You still have the entire Latin text that's included in both libraries for the polysustains. You have the in-depth soloists, plus just tons and tons of great effects and different clusters of the sort that it can really add that performance value to your MIDI mockups that just are unrivaled with what's available out there. And I wanted to just kind of end this on another note as well. I mentioned in the beginning about how I was going to make points to good reference material for you to take a look into to really help broaden your perception of writing for a choir and getting your fingers underneath what the choral music is all about. And as in anything, with studying as a composer or for mock-ups, the best thing you can do is listen to works by the masters that have come before us. For those that are really ambitious, it's always great. You can get the scores to take a look behind the harmonies, the theories, and that's great too. But even for just as something as simple as getting your hands on some good recordings and listening. For instance, for Johann Sebastian Bach, if you want to look into his enormous catalog of chorales, will give you an excellent resource for writing with good harmony and for effective and clean voice leading. If you're looking for something that just absolutely does a fantastic job with the female voice, especially sopranos, you can listen to Mozart. He was an absolute master for writing for the female voice. Just listen to, for instance, his Magic Flute opera is just, phenomenal. And even some of his ensemble compositions like Ave Verum Corpus is a fantastic piece to take a look into. Me personally, My favorite choral writers were Gabriel Fauré and Johannes Brahms. If you want to listen to, for instance, with Fauré, his Requiem, there is just an absolute wealth of information in that phenomenal piece. And spending your time and listening to that, it does a fantastic job in both the writing for the male and female choir, listening to the phrasing and the harmonies that he chose, in my opinion, will give you a really, really, really great foundation for working with libraries like this, especially when combining, your polysustains with your true legato vowels. Also, Johannes Brahms, a real master for writing for the male voice as well. Great resource there. And on the subject of Slavonic text, it's also a great idea to take a look into even some of Rachmaninoff's works, such as the Vespers, which has a pretty good influence on what I've done here also. So I hope you enjoyed this. I appreciate you taking the time to get through this tutorial with me. And again, this is Ryan Scully, and I hope you enjoy these libraries. And I will see you next time.